Hello and welcome back to The Hatch. I'm Rosie Murphy.
And I'm Sammy Roth, and this is the podcast where we talk about Lost.
We are still watching Season 4. We've reached Episode 10, Something Nice Back Home. This is, of course, a Jack flash-forward episode. We'll learn more about his relationship with Kate. On the island, he will have appendicitis. A lot to talk about.
Yeah, a surprisingly large amount. And then we're going to have more from our conversation with production designer Jim Newport, who worked on a lot of Season 4 making the sets happen.
Let's get started. As you all know by now, we start every episode of The Hatch with our hot takes. Sammy, what is your hot take on Something Nice Back Home?
So I've got just about the silliest hot take possible, I think, so please forgive me in advance. When Jack is walking through his and Kate's house at the beginning of the flash forward, and he steps on a toy and hurts his foot, and he puts the toy on the counter, it's the Millennium Falcon. It's Han Solo's ship, is Aaron's toy. And my reaction to that at first was to start laughing, because I thought, oh, this must be a Disney tie-in, because Disney acquired Lucasfilm. But I looked it up, and Disney did not acquire Lucasfilm until 2012, 4 years after this episode aired.
Yeah, I was going to say.
So I thought it was, maybe that was a flash forward in itself of what was to come in real life with Disney. Disney, of course, owns ABC as well. Disney's acquisition of Lucasfilm. That's my silly hot take, that I was disappointed it was not a direct tie-in.
Perhaps you're right, and somewhere somebody knew what was going to happen.
I mean, Disney and Lucasfilm do have a relationship going back a ways. They did a ride at Disneyland back in the 90s, so it's not like there was nothing there, but probably not an official tie-in. Anyway, that's my Disney obsession peeking out here. Rosie, what is your hot take?
So real quick before I do my hot take, we got a submission from a listener this week. This comes to us from James in North Carolina.
Hi, Sammy and Rosie. I love your show. I've listened to it at work most of the last 2 days. Just found you a couple of days ago, and you've been a good, worthwhile work companion, so I've enjoyed it. And just giving you my take on the next episode, I think you guys are going to watch Something Nice Back Home, Season 4. I think this episode, I know you guys hate Jack, and you hate Jack and Kate. I happen to be a Jack fan. I'm not so much a Jack and Kate fan, as I just think they're mentally not fit for each other. I think Jack is a much better person on the island than home because of the gotta fix it, gotta be a hero. I just don't think Jack functions well in day-to-day environment, if that makes any sense at all. He finds a way to make good things into crap, it just seems like. I don't think we see a lot of that here, and that Kate is hiding, of course, what she's doing for Sawyer when she could just say it, but I guess that's a little touchy issue with Jack, but it's just the two of them together, it just doesn't work. Never has, never will, I guess I should say. They have their brief glimpses, but that's it. But the hot take from this episode is that I really, really forget how much I love badass brotherly Sawyer protecting Claire at every turn from Miles. I just think it's hilarious. There's only a few glimpses of it, but when he's putting the quote-unquote restraining order on Miles and protecting Claire from him, it's just golden. Anyways, you guys have a great day, and I look forward to hearing your next episode. Thanks.
Thank you, James, for sending your hot take. That's a pretty good one.
Yeah, I just want to defend. We don't hate Jack. Our position on Jack is evolving very much, I think, as Jack's character evolves. And I think...
Yes, and we will have some more positive stuff to say about Jack this week as we get into it. So
I am inclined to agree with you, James, that Jack and Kate's relationship never quite worked, and this is the closest it comes to working, and I'm sure we'll get into that a great deal as we discuss the episode, but I think that's a good read. I also really, really like these thoughts about Sawyer being a big brother to Claire. I think that's exactly right. That's exactly what he's being, and I was thinking about that a lot and trying to think about why Sawyer had become so protective and all that, and I just think that really crystallized that for me, so thanks for that.
If you want to leave a hot take as well and have us play it on the show, you can do that. Give us a phone call. The number is 9546-DHARMA. Again, 9546-DHARMA. Try to keep it to a minute or less, and we'll play it on the show. Rosie, what is your hot take about this week's episode?
A lot to talk about in this episode. I had trouble settling on one thing, but I'm going to go with this. Juliet, very much the Saeed of this episode.
Ooh. You mean in terms of her, like, taking charge and getting shit done?
Yeah, and having a wide variety of extremely useful skills, right? Like, I mean, we know already that, Juliet is one of the people on the island with medical training. Makes a lot of sense that she would be the person to perform this surgery. Bernard, a dentist, also gets pressed into service. But Juliet makes the right call when she says, all right, we need to knock Jack out here so we can finish this.
That's a really intense scene, by the way.
She takes decisive action in the best interest of everyone involved. And then she's turns out at the end of the episode to be much more in tune with everyone's emotions than they are. There's that scene where she's sort of cleaning Jack up after the surgery, and Kate comes back and she tells Kate that, Jack kissed her, but I think he only did it to prove to himself that he doesn't love someone else. And of course she realizes Jack's been awake the whole time, and she just very subtly manipulates that situation. Again, I think to the benefit of all parties involved.
I'm with you. I had a bunch of those same notes about Juliet and just about how this is like a really strong episode for her. Mm-hmm. I love the comparison to Sayid, which I think is so apt. And I mean, Sayid is off on the boat, so Sayid can't do Sayid stuff. It's got to be Juliet. But I thought at first I was a little bit annoyed that the whole love quadrangle thing was coming back. Like there's the scene earlier in the episode where Jack is insisting that Kate, has to be in there holding the mirror, and Juliet seems a little bit miffed by that. And I'm thinking, okay, so we're going back to this. But then when we do get to that scene that you described, I think that's a very strong scene. And I think it's a strong scene because of Juliet. I think she shows a lot of, it's selfless, right? It's selfless that, she says, when she tells Kate that Jack kissed her, she's actually very honest and introspective. She says it was nice. Like, she acknowledges that this was pleasing to her, that she was glad Jack kissed her. But still in this moment, what she's doing is she's sort of giving up any chance that she might have with him because she knows that his heart deep down is really with Kate, and she knows that's the right thing to do. I thought that was actually quite powerful, and I was impressed after everything else that she got done this episode and took charge to save Jack's life, that she's sort of relinquishing here any chance she might still have to be with him.
Yeah, I think she's doing that, but I also think she's making it abundantly clear to both Jack and Kate that, like, the love quadrangle is over. At least as far as she's concerned, right? She's sort of relinquishing her role in this, and she tells them both the way that she tells them is kind of graceful in the sense that, like, it's not going to be an argument. It's not going to be a real she just kind of gives them both permission to, go forth and do as you will. Yep.
Which they do, eventually.
Well, yes and no. Anyway, should we go and talk about the flash forward?
We should. Before we do that, do you mind if we actually start on Island? Because something you said made me think of another comment I wanted to make about Jack. The comment about Sayid and the fact that Sayid is off on the boat. When Jack insists that, Jack at the beginning of this episode is refusing to acknowledge that he has a serious problem, right? Like he's so laser focused on getting everyone off the island and being in charge of that process and fulfilling his promise that he's basically lying to himself about the fact that there's something wrong here. And we see that because when Juliet examines him and tells him he has appendicitis, he's not surprised at all. Like he knew what was going on. She asks him, has it ruptured yet? And he has the answer right away, which is no. Which I think is Jack at his best and his worst, which we see a lot in this episode. Like he's so determined to get everyone home and to fulfill the promise to do that, and he's so headstrong about it that he's refusing to acknowledge something that could actually really get in the way of his doing that, which is, as Juliet says, if his appendix ruptures, he's going to die. The reason I thought of this right now with reference to Sayid was that I realized, so Jack is, he's trying so hard to get this thing done, but doing it in a way that he's actually, like, hurting, risking not getting it done because he's so headstrong and doesn't want to admit that he has a problem. But I realized, like, wow, if Jack dies, they really are fucked. And they're especially fucked because Sayid isn't there. like Saeed is off on the boat. Like normally if we were watching an episode where, you know, Jack was in trouble and I would be thinking, oh, Saeed will step up and take the lead in his absence. But Saeed, you don't even have that backstop here. Like if Jack goes down.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's true. I mean, interestingly, something I think this episode does really well is highlight the strengths of lots of other characters. We see both Jin and Sun being very clever and determined and, you know, focused on their mission to go get this equipment. There's also the scene where Jin, in order to get Charlotte to reveal the truth about being able to speak Korean, like threatens Daniel Faraday and says he'll break all of his fingers one by one. And, you know, they both play that super well, tactically. Sure. Juliet, of course, saves Jack's life. Bernard steps up to the plate in a big way. Like, but you're right. Without Jack, who's to say how this would go?
No, for sure, because all of these people are working on their own individual things, whereas Jack is laser focused on the big picture, which is getting home.
You're right.
But actually, I'm glad you make that comment, because I agree with you. Lots of characters shine. I mean, we talked about Juliet as well, and how strong an episode this is for her, and making sure that that she can save Jack's life and directing everyone. I think it's a strong episode for Sawyer too, with the protectiveness that he shows towards Claire, building on the protectiveness he shows towards Hurley last episode. Like, even if it ultimately sort of backfires in Claire's case when Miles just lets her walk into the jungle without stopping her. Right. It kind of made me feel like, gee, you know, I've been waiting for the Dharma Initiative storyline in season 5 for Sawyer to become this better version of himself. But you can see the progress toward that here, that this is a better Sawyer. And another character who I was really randomly impressed by was Daniel Faraday, when he made that speech to Charlotte about how her bad attitude was getting them in trouble because she and for whatever reason I laughed uncontrollably at that point. Just I think it was Jeremy Davies' delivery of this, just all this intensity and drama going around, and he pauses to like scold Charlotte, like, your attitude, like, this is why they don't trust us, and he's gesticulating wildly. It was just so out of nowhere, but it was good. Like, he was right. So I was impressed by him too, and laughing quite hard.
Yeah. You know, you brought up Sawyer, and I do want to talk a little bit about Sawyer really quick. He has become very protective of Claire and Aaron in the last couple of episodes. I mean, he ran into active gunfire last episode to save them. Where do we think that comes from? Like, what is going on with Sawyer with regards to Claire? Is it just this is a mother and a baby, and so, you know, they're about as defenseless as it gets? Or what do you think is happening there?
That's a really interesting question. I mean, I guess we could look to Sawyer's past and to the fact that he knows that he has a child and he doesn't have a role in that child's life. With Clementine, which we know he feels some level of guilt over, because at the end of this season, and as we learn, I mean, we get hints of this in the flash forward, and as we see in next season, he, you know, asks Kate to go, you know, watch out for his child for him, and to check in on Cassidy and to give her that money. So maybe that's part of it, that this is sort of a fill-in for his own, you know, inability to protect his own child.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just random theory. It's a good question.
Yeah. But it's nice, and it's very sweet, and I'm enjoying. Until now, I found it refreshing.
But the flash forwards. I'm sorry, you wanted to start there, and I brought us back to the island. But the flash forwards, a lot is going on.
A lot is going on. So I kind of thought I was gonna hate this flash forward. I remembered some of the like cutesy romantic Jack and Kate scenes, and I forgot that what's really happening here is like the start of Jack's descent into where we find him at the end of this 3-year period on land, where he's, you know, battling addiction, and his beard is long, and he thinks that we have to go back.
Right, he's depressed and manic and kind of out of his mind.
Yeah, and we're seeing the beginning of that here. I mean, we see, you know, him visiting. Hurley sort of plants this idea that maybe we're dead, maybe this is heaven. somebody's going to come see you, like Charlie came to see me, and then Christian, Jack sort of has a vision of Christian in the hospital, and then he starts getting paranoid about Kate in a way that's really unsettling. And then we see him ask a fellow doctor to write him a prescription, and then he takes it with a beer. It's all the pieces are there, and I was like, oh shit, this is the start. We're at the edge of that precipice, and it's downhill from here.
Yeah, I agree with you. I had the same kind of recollection in my head that this was a lackluster flash forward. But it's totally not, for all of the reasons you described. I was especially, I think, affected by the pathos of knowing where this is going. Like it's actually quite sad to see this, fleeting happiness that Jack and Kate have found together.
Yeah.
I mean, the scene where he proposes is such a nice scene.
Yeah.
The scene where Jack is reading to Aaron is such a nice scene. I mean, even the first scene where there's the build-up to surprise, it's, Kate in the shower and she's, they're living together. Like, it's a series of really lovely moments that are so unusual for this show where these characters are actually happy together. Like and when it cuts to the lost title card, when they're kissing in the bathroom, that's one of probably the few times on the show where it's not something dramatic and or scary that's happening when you cut to the title card. It's sweet, it's soft music, like. And so to watch this and to be seeing the seeds planted of like how this is all going to be crumbling down before our eyes, it's awful.
Yeah.
And they keep hinting at it, not just in the explicit ways like you're talking about, but in subtle ways. Like there's even in that first scene, Kate says to Jack, "I bought you a razor," and Jack's like, "Oh, you don't like the stubble?" And it's like, "Oh no!" Like even as they set up the happiness, they're reminding you there of where this is going, which is the Jack with the big beard that we got introduced to at the end of season 3.
Yeah,
where he and Kate are totally estranged from each other.
Yeah. And there's a lot going on here with Aaron and who's supposed to raise him and whose kid he is.
He wanted me to give you a message.
A message?
Made me write it down so I wouldn't mess it up. You're not supposed to raise him, Jack.
Which is interesting because Charlie, of course, kind of thought he was supposed to raise Aaron.
Yeah.
Or thought he was supposed to protect him. Of course, we remember the baptism episode.
How could we forget the baptism episode? Actually, that's an interesting point of reference to make here. I wasn't thinking about that, but totally.
It seems fitting that Charlie is the person who would bring that message to bear, suspending whether or not Charlie's really there or not. But on that note, I mean, do we think Christian is really there?
Yeah, I wanted to discuss this too. It seems feasible either way. I mean, the point you made that it makes sense that Charlie would be delivering a message like that, I think, leans in favor of, these are really manifestations of some kind that either the island has sent or that these are really, the ghosts of Charlie and Christian performing these roles. But, I mean, it seems equally likely that these could be, I don't want to say figments of their imagination, but I mean, Hurley, very clearly continuing to grapple with mental health issues, and Jack seems to be going in that direction as well. I think it could go either way. I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but why would Christian be? Do you think he was going to deliver a more extensive message in the lobby, and then they were interrupted by that other doctor, or?
I'm not sure, but I think Christian's, just his presence sends the message that if we think it's intentional, that is supposed to be sent here, which is you shouldn't have left them behind, that you have to go back. Like, I mean, it seems like that's what the purpose that Charlie and Christian both serve, and I think just seeing his father, who, of course he also saw on the island and they never recovered his... I mean, he's wearing also the white shoes that he was wearing, the white tennis shoes that he was wearing in his coffin that were found on, in the show back in White Rabbit. I don't know, but again, still think it could go either way. Like, is the island calling them back? Are their own heads, the guilt they feel about the people they left behind telling them they have to go back? It kind of works both ways.
Yeah, and we get a little bit of insinuation about sort of how Jack has changed his mind. Like,
I thought you didn't want anything to do with her.
I changed my mind after the trial.
Living with Kate, taking care of Aaron, it all seems so perfect. Just like heaven.
yeah, I don't know. There's just a lot going on there about Jack coming around the bend and thinking, no, I can be a father to this kid. I can redo him. I can be there for him. But then having this very deep-seated guilt or I don't know what it is exactly. You know what I mean?
Well, so I think that, feeling like, oh, he's not really your child, where he yells at Kate, which is a deeply, deeply shitty thing to say, and the shittiest moment of the episode for Jack. I think that's a little bit of a distraction or a canard for what's, I don't know if I'm using the word canard correctly, but I think that what's really going on in Jack's head is not that, but his own insecurity about what kind of a father, is he. Does he really have it in him to be a good father? Because his father was so terrible to him, and that's the only example he has. There's a line.
It's just sweet hearing you say nice things about your dad.
I don't say nice things about my dad. Well, he was a good storyteller, I'll give him that.
And then when Jack goes and proposes to Kate, I mean, you see this reinforced where he says, the other night when I was reading to Aaron, you said that I was a natural. Do you really think I'm good at this? And it's when Kate says yes that he does propose to her. So I think this has to do with Jack's doubts about himself more than it does anything external.
Well, that's what's so fascinating, though, is those doubts would have existed no matter the circumstances with the island. But
absolutely,
then the thing that Hurley happens to say to him, which is, you're not supposed, Charlie said you're not supposed to raise him. I mean, that just like embeds itself and grows like a weed inside Jack, right?
Ooh, yeah.
Like it's taking advantage of this existing insecurity. And I think that's the thing that starts him down the path of, well, what if we weren't supposed to leave the island?
Totally.
And it's like
totally.
Christian is still, maybe that's part of what's going on with the Christian apparitions. Like Christian is still present in this way because he left you this legacy of being a poor father, making you fear that you're going to, it's all these things are tangled up together, and it's just like hard to articulate, but it's super well done, especially because this is the episode where we're reminded that Christian was also Claire's father. And, then Claire and Aaron becomes, left alone in the jungle because Claire follows Christian into who knows where.
Even when he's really the man in black, Christian is just a deeply shitty father and turns his children into shitty parents. No.
Yeah. I mean, it's so wild that he shows up and I mean, it's not him, he shows up in corporeal form and leads Claire away from her child, sort of perpetuating this weird cycle that's happening here. I don't haven't fully formed this thought. I would love thoughts from the listeners on this weird tangled web. But
I would read a master's dissertation on Christian Shephard's role in Lost. He's low-key one of the more fascinating parts of the show.
Yeah.
By the way, I didn't mean to imply that Jack was a deeply shitty father. I mean, it looks like he was doing a very good job at being a father. It's one of the sad parts. But then when he starts to go down this road, and he then yells at Kate about how Aaron's not even her child, and Aaron overhears, it's so sad that that's where it ends up. And with regards to the Hurley scene that you referenced, that Hurley sets him down this road, even though I know it's not really Hurley's fault, I found myself kind of getting angry with Hurley during that scene. Because it's just like, dude, what are you doing? He's happy. I get that you're not happy, and I know that you're having, problems here, and that there's a mental illness component, so I feel bad about it. But it just feels like, Hurley, leave him alone. He's okay. Jack says in that scene,
just because I'm happy doesn't mean that this isn't real, Hurley.
I was happy too, Jack. For a while, anyway.
And it seems like Hurley's attitude is because Hurley is not happy that anyone else's happiness can't be real.
I don't agree with that.
Okay.
I mean, I think...
Talk me down.
I think Hurley thinks, not that the happiness is not real, but that it's... I almost said, well, but that it's fake, which is in fact the opposite of real. But that it's a false happiness, right? Like I think from Hurley's point of view, the only way that Jack and Kate can be happy is to intentionally forget everything that they did to leave the island. And we don't know what those things are yet. It's implied that it's almost more sinister than I think it turns out to be. But I could see how Hurley would feel like, Jack and Kate, are you just like forgetting everything that happened to us? Are you just going to try to live as if that never happened? Because it did, and it caused, seemingly caused Hurley a great deal of trauma, and arguably caused everyone, was very, very painful for all parties. But it does feel like Jack and Kate are trying to not think about it, which, like, fair enough.
Yeah, I mean, there's
you can't
an
really
argument
blame them for that.
They deserve that to an extent.
Yeah.
I guess I feel a little bad now that I it sort of seems like I'm blaming Hurley, but I also feel like it is. I mean, I can't help but feel like no matter what he's feeling, that it's unfair of him to be trying to take this happiness away from Jack, and I think part of that is the line where, as we were discussing, where he says that, hey, Charlie has this message for you. You're not supposed to raise him. After he says that, Hurley gives Jack this look and says,
You think he means Aaron?
And to me that felt super underhanded, because it's obvious that the
Who
line
else
is
would
about...
he be talking about?
Right. So when Hurley says that, it's sort of like it seems pretty clear that he's trying to, play dumb or play innocent here, while he's, knowingly twisting this knife into Jack, because obviously he knows what the line means. So it seems to me that there is an element of manipulation to it, and it almost makes me wonder if, a manifestation of Charlie really did say that to Hurley, or if he just made it up, if he claimed that Charlie said that. Because it seems like, and I don't know that there's enough evidence to really say, but it definitely seems like Hurley is acting with an element of intentionality here in trying to make Jack unhappy with the way things have worked out, and to not just go on with his life in a way that upsets me. Do you think he means Aaron? I mean, my God, of course. You know that.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I don't know that I see this as like Hurley trying to ruin Jack's happiness. I think I see it as it's a very, very slight sort of change of lens, but I think I see it as Hurley feeling frustrated that, like, why aren't you guys taking this seriously? That does come with an amount of grab him by the shoulders and shake him and say, like, how can you possibly be happy after what we did? And I think on one hand, like, the reading that's sympathetic to Hurley is Hurley's trying to get Jack to, like, snap out of this because he thinks it's this mirage that he's created for himself. Yeah, I feel bad for Hurley.
I think that I do too, and the thing to me that's most sympathetic to Hurley, and I've said this, obviously he's he's dealing with mental illness, and it's quite upsetting, and it's like I don't want to, to an extent, like, he's not totally in control of his maybe he shouldn't be totally blamed for everything he says or does if it's bad. Like, he's dealing with a lot, so I want to be sympathetic to that. But this is an episode that's told from Jack's perspective, where we really get to see, for once, Jack and Kate both kind of happy and, if not carefree, then, in a better place than we ever see them on the show otherwise. So it's frustrating to realize that this is going to get torn down and that this is how it starts.
Yeah, but I've got to wonder, if it hadn't been Hurley, would it have just been something else?
Well, Locke does show up eventually.
Right. Like, the island wanted them to come back. But also, like, this deep, deep insecurity has always been with Jack, seemingly will always be with him. Like, I don't know. I kind of feel like even if Hurley hadn't said, oh, I have this message from Charlie and it's you're not meant to be a father to this boy. I just feel like something else would have flipped the switch, or would have planted that weed that started growing.
That's a very, very good point.
Yeah, and we can blame Hurley if we want, but whether it's the island or whether it's just sort of Jack's own insecurities, or in both. In this case, it's both. Yeah, I feel like one of the interesting things about that I feel after this episode is like Jack's decline was inevitable in a way. Because Jack is a fixer, right? He always needs something to fix. He can never just be happy. That's his whole thing.
Right. And he left this big problem unsolved, which is these people that he, feels like he left behind. For sure. And I mean, you're right. And the stuff that's there beneath the surface, the feeling that Aaron is not really Kate's child or his child, and they left Claire behind, and the sort of gross stuff where, he seems still jealous of Sawyer and suspicious of Kate because he wonders if she's, really fully there, which I thought was not a good look at all. I mean, you're right. That stuff is all still there and probably comes to the surface eventually. Mm-hmm. So I can't disagree with that.
Yeah.
I do want to say before I forget, I was so impressed by Matthew Fox in this episode. Mm-hmm. And I know that he's not always my favorite actor on the show or yours, but I thought especially the scene where he proposes to Kate, where he wakes her up in the night. I was so moved by that scene and by his acting there. I just felt that his sort of insecurity and doubt were so raw and real, and I really, really bought it. I thought it was one of his strongest scenes on the show. But I thought the whole episode he was quite good.
Yeah, I agree. This is Jack at his most complex, maybe.
Definitely.
And certainly at his most vulnerable. And it's fascinating to watch. It's riveting.
It's also pretty badass that he wants to stay awake during his surgery, even though it turns out to be a terrible idea.
Oh, it's a terrible idea.
It is, but that one I kind of get. It's like he thought he could handle the pain.
My first note on this episode was a good old-fashioned medical plot line. We haven't had one of these in a long time. That's just like oh shit, somebody's having like a strange medical episode and Jack needs to solve it. Oh, but twist, it's Jack.
I kind of wondered as well what inspired them to do, at the height of, like the drama of this show as we're really building into the end game here of what's been going on for 4 seasons, like what inspired them to do a Jack gets appendicitis storyline? Because it seems so random, but it works so well. It turns out to be such a good idea. Like, I'm trying to imagine who was inspired to pitch that in the writer's room and what it took to convince everyone that it was a good call. It works out, surprisingly.
Yeah, it works out great.
Also, just want to quickly mention Rose. There's an interesting scene where Rose and Bernard talk, and Rose says, basically implies that it couldn't possibly be random that, Jack's getting sick, people get better on this island. So she's implying that, Jack did something wrong, or maybe the island is punished, or wants to get in the way of what's happening, or he's being punished. I don't know. I found myself disagreeing with Rose, but only because I couldn't possibly think of what would have Jack done to deserve this, or why would the island be punishing him? It didn't make any sense to me, and I'm curious if you have any ideas about that.
Yeah, my reading on that was what Rose was getting at was we're not supposed to leave. And the island is sort of, it doesn't want to kill Jack, doesn't want to strike him down. He didn't do anything wrong, but it wants to make it harder for us to leave. And I think that's a decent point.
That's a good read. That's actually quite a good read.
Yeah.
No, I think that the reason I especially like that interpretation, besides just the fact that it makes perfect sense, is that it ties the on-island storyline to the flash-forward storyline so well, because the flash-forward storyline is all about Jack, beginning to realize we were not supposed to leave, we have to go back. And the on-island storyline, in a sense, could then be driven by the island trying to tell them, no, you're not supposed to leave, stay here. Yeah. Which is I'd never thought about that. That makes me like this episode even more.
Very clever. I know. I was just thinking that. I'm so surprised by how much I like this episode. It's fabulous.
It really is. Should we transition to our second part of our conversation with Jim Newport?
Yeah. So just to recap, Jim was a production designer who worked on season 4. Now he lives in Phuket, Thailand, which will come up in this conversation in a way that I find pretty funny.
Yeah, so we'll, he worked on the first 8 episodes of season 4, so by this point he had moved on after the writer's strike. But we'll go back and talk about some of the sets he worked on and some of his experiences working with the people behind the show.
Good clarification. Thanks for that.
You mentioned this when you reached out to us. You said you were the 7th production designer, in the show going into the 4th season. You said it had a reputation as being a tough show. What did you mean by that? Why was it tough?
Well, I was on the board of directors during the first 2 years of Lost. I was on the board of directors of the Art Directors Guild,
okay.
And we were quite aware of the fact that they were replacing production designers after half of the run of the season. After 12 episodes or something, right? Which was uncommon. You could have a production designer who does the pilot. That's very common. And then you have somebody who comes in and does the run of the show, right? But in general, you don't replace people that often. So there was a lot of talk about what's going on over there in Hawaii, And so we interviewed a couple of the guys who had done the show. We talked to Jim Spencer, and I forget the other guy we talked to. I didn't know him, but I know Jim Spencer pretty well. And he said, guys, it's 18-hour days nonstop. It just doesn't let up. You're burned out constantly. You have 2 whole crews that shoot the show. You have a director. You have an entire camera crew. You have an entire shooting crew for one show. Then you have their second show that's starting about a week later, has another entire crew, a director and an entire fucking crew. The art department had 1 production designer. We had 2 art directors. And if you're smart, you try to work one art director on one show and the other art director on the other show. We had 1 set decorator, and then she had assistants. But that position of being in charge of both of those departments was a massive responsibility, and it just never let up. So you got burned out. That's what it was.
So what was the unusual part that they were filming, that they were doing 2 episodes at once, or that they only had 1 person responsible for both of them?
Well, Sammy, the scripts were incredibly involved and complicated, which is the reason why the show was so good. The scripts would come in initially. They would be an hour and a half long if you timed them. And people would always time the scripts. The script supervisor, when she got the script, that was her first job, was to time it out. And she'd often come into the first story meeting and say, guys, this script times out at an hour and 25 minutes. It's not an hour-long show. It's not a 45 or 55-minute show. So you have to trim. You have to make cuts right away. So there were very complicated scenarios. And then we're shooting in Hawaii, and Hawaii is where we have to do everything. We have to go to Berlin in the winter. I had 10 trucks of crushed ice come into downtown Honolulu on a day in which the temperature was 95 degrees Fahrenheit, and cover the streets with, to make it look like snow in Berlin. And you have to do that every freaking episode, every day. The island stuff is easy. The jungle is great. It's easy. And the 2 directors that we had, Jack and Steven, right? I forget Steven's last name, but
Steven Williams.
He was a very cool guy. Very cool
guy.
Steven didn't care. To him, a tree was a tree. Jack Bender, no. Every tree is poetry, So Jack had to find every special tree, So that was interesting. So it was just everything became so complicated, Sammy, that you got burned out. On many days, I would drive that entire island more than once, maybe 200 miles around that island, just visiting the various hot spots that we were putting fires out in. We'd have 2 shooting locations going on, because you'd have a show, number 1, that was shooting. You would have a show that just finished shooting, but now you have 5 days of cleanup. We had 10 days to shoot every episode, but you had 5 extra days to clean it up. But when those 5 days are going on, you have another show that's shooting as well. So it was just horrific, Sammy.
I enjoyed what you said about Jack, by the way. Jack Bender was the first guest we had on this podcast. We had him on for the first few episodes, and Lovely, lovely guy. Almost everyone who worked on the show has talked about how demanding he was. I mean, everyone,
Great.
positive, but very demanding, it sounds like.
He was incredibly demanding,
Yeah.
and I knew that the very first set that I gave to him, he decided to test me. I'll tell you a little story.
Yeah.
In season 4, the first thing that I built for him that he shot was the interrogation room, and I think Hurley's in there, right, being interrogated in a police interrogation room with a two-way mirror on the wall that turns into water, right, and I built him a nice little set that had to go into some crazy place because they were shooting out on a location, and they didn't have time to come back to the studio. So we had to build that in let's say a recreation center or something like that. So we built it there, right? And I did it as a nice kind of conventional police station, one that had not been. You didn't slam people's heads up against the wall. People weren't smeared. It was clean. In other words, what I'm saying, it was a nice, clean space. And Jack came in and he looked at it, and there was nothing wrong with it, And Jack looked at it and he went, "No, I don't want clean. I want a dirty, dingy interrogation room where people have been smacked around in here and so forth. And they shoot in 1 hour, And I got almost no crew. I have a great set decorator, Carol, with me, and her crew. I think I had my standby painter, and we had to turn it into exactly what Jack wanted, which we did, And I could see Jack smiling all the time, sitting over in his director's chair, working with the script supervisor on the scene, and so forth, and looking over what we're doing. We're scrambling like mad, We're finding stencil letters in a stationery shop someplace, 20 miles away, so we can put no smoking on the walls, stuff like that. Anyway, when it was done, he went, "Looks great, man." I knew exactly what he was doing. He was testing me. He was testing me. It was fun.
I guess you passed the test and stayed on the rest of that season.
I did.
I was just thinking about other sets that stood out from those first couple of episodes. Did you? I mean, I assume you worked on.
Well, I'll tell you what. We were talking a lot about the fact that they were going to find remnants on the island of an ancient civilization. There was going to be, and I think it was Carlton or Damon had gone to Angkor Wat on vacation the same time I came on board, right? And I know Angkor Wat very well in Cambodia, right?
Okay.
And the ancient temples. And he said something like that. And I said, okay. So I started, that was always in the back of my head while I was doing the season 4. I was thinking about how we would establish something like that on the island. And I know that before I left, we had started some sketches and some stuff worked up on that. Eventually what they did, as I recall, was nothing more than a giant foot statue. Do you recall that one? In one of the later episodes, it was like a giant foot. Yeah, right. Which was not really that was not my idea. My idea was a temple. So. Yeah.
But no, in fact, they did have a temple. They first showed it. They showed the outer parts of it in season 5 in a couple of episodes, and then in season 6, the first 6 episodes, there's a whole storyline that takes place inside the temple.
Okay, all right.
Did you work on any of the Dharma stations? I think they went in this episode you did. They went to the station with the poison gas, the Tempest, and there was a fight scene in there. I assume you must have worked on that.
That was a Jim Newport discovery. That's a real location.
Yeah.
And that exists because in World War II, that was a ammunition dump. Or they call it a munitions dump, right? Hollowed out into the side of a mountain, and it goes miles deep into that mountain to store all of these munitions in there, right? With a giant fucking round 4-foot thick door, So it's a real place, Yeah.
Pretty
and
cool.
It has a magnificent view of Oahu from up there. I mean, it's just incredible. Yeah.
So you didn't have to do too much for that.
I had to do very little in there. I think we put some lights in there. That was about it. You came out into that, I think what you're just describing, which was this place where they were trying to desperately stop the gas from exploding, right? I mean, that was what was going on when she went there. That was dare I say, a dairy. I think it was a place where they processed milk. You know, it was a real place, and they had all these. You know, they had all the metal canisters and a lot of gizmos and things like that. But they were basically pasteurizing milk. That's what it was.
This is the interior you're talking about. The interior of the Tempest station.
Yeah.
Oh wow,
yeah.
Interesting.
It was a place where they pasteurized milk, and then again we put in a lot of gizmos and so forth to make it look like the gas was going to explode. But it was really just a nice little place where they were pasteurizing milk. There was no danger at all.
So you only used the munitions depot for the exteriors.
That's right, and then going down the tunnel, going down the hall.
Interesting, very interesting. You know, obviously you do a good job, because I would never think of this when watching it. It looks so real. I mean, it looks like what you want it to look like.
Yeah.
Any other? I mean, I have a couple of sort of wrap up questions. But I mean, anything else from that season or from your time on set, stories that come to mind, or anecdotes that you'd want to share that we haven't talked about?
Well, it's you've brought back a lot of memories, Sammy, and a lot of them are about the Hawaiians, the Hawaiian crew.
Okay.
They became really, really good friends. I still correspond with a couple of those guys right now. Because this is the second show that I did there. I was there with these guys on Fantasy Island 10 years before. I'd been over there a couple of times to do movies and so forth. So you have guys in the Teamsters like Udi, who ran the transportation department. And he's got 3 brothers. And their names are Udi, Doody, and Booty. I swear to God, something like that, right? And they literally mean number 1 son, number 2 son, number 3 son. That's how their father named them, right?
That's great.
And they're just the sweetest freaking guys, But they're also the toughest guys you'll ever meet too, And they also have the keys to the island. They can get you in anywhere, because it's a small place, Hawaii, Oahu, So the memories that I have that are fondest are of the Hawaiians, the Hawaiian crew. They were just the best.
So why, the writer's strike happened. Why did you decide to leave at that point?
Honestly, I was injured. I went out on that boat that I was telling you about that we went out to sea and saw that was mining the water deep down. We stayed out there too long, and the seas got rough. And when we came back in, we were on a speedboat, and it was doing this. It was boom, 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 right? And most of us were sitting on just these little bench seats, right? And my back just went completely screwy. And when that writer's strike came, I was kind of glad, because I needed to get some physical therapy, and I didn't walk for a while. It was bad. So it just kind of put an end of that part of my career right then. It wasn't time for me to go back. Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that, but it seems like you're okay now.
I'm fine, Sammy.
That's great. Fine. You recovered just like John Locke on the show, who couldn't walk.
Yeah. Magnificent recovery, a miraculous recovery.
Yeah. But by the way, so I mentioned this at the top. You live in Phuket now. I thought that was interesting as a Lost fan, because there's sort of an infamous episode of the show where there's a flashback where Jack, the character, is living in Phuket.
They showed me that when I was being interviewed on the show when I went over there. They had just finished that episode, and the art department very proudly showed me the episode, right? And I told them what was wrong with it.
What did you tell them?
And they did a really good job, but like they had signs in fluorescent in Chinese. Now it's an entirely different language, So, and frankly, if we're going to build a fluorescent sign in Phuket, it's going to be in English. Believe me. They don't care about telling the Thai people to come in here. They care about telling the tourists to come in here. So that was the number one thing. Number two, they had people eating with chopsticks, Very rare. They might eat noodles with chopsticks, but probably not. They're probably eating with a fork and a spoon, right? And number 3, Bai Ling, who I know very well. Certainly she's not Thai, but that's okay.
Is that the actress who was in that flashback?
Yeah.
Yeah.
When she goes into Jack's bedroom, she doesn't take her shoes off. No Thai person would ever walk in anybody's house with their shoes on, So, other than that, they did fine.
That's very funny. That's the one of the very few episodes of Lost that's fairly widely disliked, but I had never heard that perspective on it before, so that's very interesting to me.
Well, as I recall, Sammy, all it does is it just kind of explains why he has tattoos, right?
That's right.
Yeah. So I guess the makeup department got tired of trying to disguise them, So yeah. They figured it out. Now, the other thing, Sammy, we should if you haven't heard this, I'm sure you have. They didn't know where they were going with the story. I mean, it was not set in stone. They had 26 people on an island. That's 20. That's one season per person, and then we got the next season as the backstory per person. So we're on the air for 2 years. That was basically the original pitch. But beyond that, it was kind of, hit and miss, as they went along, which unfortunately, I think explains, and I'm sure you've discussed this a lot, why it ended kind of sadly. It really was not a satisfactory ending.
It was. Did you watch the ending?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Like everybody. Yeah. Sure.
Were you disappointed by it?
Yes, I was.
Okay. That's interesting. I was not personally. I was fairly satisfied, but it's divisive. I mean, some people were very disappointed. You've obviously had you've had a long career and done a lot of different stuff. How where does Lost stand for you? Like when you look back at all the things you've worked on, does Lost stand out? Does Lost not stand out? Why or why not? I guess where does it fit in for you in the pantheon of stuff you've worked on?
Lost stands out because when you tell people what you've done in your career. Yeah, I've done a lot of really good movies, but some of them are not well known. Broke Down Palace, Heart Like a Wheel, The Piano Lesson. They're really good stuff. But you say Lost. Oh, really? You did Lost? Yeah. So it's nice to have one of those. Yeah. And I've got to tell you, when I went off to do the gig, I have a friend who works with me here. He's an art director, and he's a very, very talented British guy, young man. And I told him what I was going to go do, and he went, "Fuck me, that's got to be the best job in the world," because he's a designer and he's loved Lost. So to him, to go and design Lost has to be the best job in the world. So yeah,
fabulous. What I know things have been a little crazy, obviously, with COVID. But what have you been working on recently? Where could people see your work if they wanted to see something more recent?
Things I like. After Lost, I did Bangkok Dangerous. Nicolas Cage over here in Bangkok. Then I did a low budget film called Ninja: Shadow of a Tear. Again, Bangkok. So I'm doing stuff over here. Mechanic Resurrection with Jason Statham, because they shot the whole thing here. So kind of people know that I'm here. So if you want to come over here and I can do production design for you, or I can put together a Thai crew art department for you.
Interesting.
So I do that. I also write books.
Oh, you're holding up the Vampire of Siam.
Vampire of Siam. Yeah, right.
Nice.
There's four of these books right now. There'll be a fifth one in about 2 months. I've got a couple of standalone novels. This is a Jimi Hendrix book.
Oh yeah, Chasing Jimmy. You see that there.
And that's a novel about Jimi Hendrix.
Okay.
And then I have a alter ego who's Jimmy Fame, and he's a musician. So
Jimmy Fame.
I have a band here, and we do some gigs, and we're recording right now. We're recording a new CD.
So this is fascinating to me to learn that the crew was already talking about the temple. It's hinted at in Meet Kevin Johnson when Ben sends Alex and Carl and Rousseau to the temple. And
it's actually
the fact
hinted
that
back in Through the Looking Glass, the season 3 finale, because first he
Yeah.
sends Richard and the rest of them to the temple, which
Yeah.
so it's been on their minds. But yeah,
Yeah, I guess it was interesting to realize that that was always going to be a place where we got to go to. I guess to this point, it just feels like something that exists kind of, off the map somewhere. No, they knew even at this point that we were going to get to see it someday. I love that.
one thing I actually wondered hearing that is I wondered if before the writers' strike, when the season was going to be a couple episodes longer and maybe a little bit different, it made me wonder, like, was there a plan in the back half of season 4 to show us the temple that then they scrapped when they had to condense stuff after the writers' strike? Like that would somewhat explain to me why they would have been having the production designer and some of the other crew like beginning to sketch stuff out if this was. Although then again, maybe they would have had to have been more advanced by that point. I don't know, but it's interesting either way.
Yeah, and that would explain why they've already hinted at it with increasing frequency.
Yeah,
but
yep,
an interesting theory.
Yeah, it was also fun to hear him dunk on Stranger in a Strange Land a bit, and how they didn't quite get the setting right of Phuket.
Indeed.
well deserved.
Yeah.
Anyway, we'll be back next week. We're going to be watching Cabin Fever, where events continue with Christian Shephard in the cabin, and it's a Locke episode with a more traditional flashback structure.
Next week, we will be returning to our interview with Kevin Durand, who played Martin Keamy. He has some phenomenal scenes in Cabin Fever, which we'll discuss.
And then we'll have some more from Michael Emerson in the finale, but also one more surprise guest we haven't told you about yet. So you'll just have to wait and see who else we're bringing on the Hatch this year.
In the meantime, it is always such a pleasure to talk with you on social media. We are at facebook.com/thehatchpodcast and on Twitter at @thehatchpodcast.
And rate and review us if you don't mind on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get the show. We'd appreciate it.
Our theme music is by Andy G. Cohen. Our cover art is by Danny Roth.
And we'll be back next week.
Namaste.